Okay, let's get started. Today we are here at the Paul Robeson Memorial event in Petworth. This is Dan Kerr. It is April 9th, 2022. Do we have permission to record you?
Yes, you do.
Could you tell us your name?
Reverend Graylan Scott Hagler.
Fantastic. Would you mind telling me a little bit about how you view your artistic or cultural expression or your activism, and tell us about that?
Well, one of the things is I think that many of our activism takes place in a different context. It can take place in art, can take place in spirituality and religion, can take place in terms of the work we do in a community, for example. And, you know, part of what Uzikee has done here, Uzikee Nelson, I'm related to him. I need to tell you that his wife is my cousin, and his work is one that continues to try to amplify history, and particularly significant figures in history, and the particular influences of history upon a community, upon a society. And so again, you know, that work that is here in Petworth clearly is a reflection of that kind of activism that comes through the arts.
That's beautiful. And do you, how has that work influenced and inspired you?
Well, I think that art always influences in this way, because you know when you think about movements are built upon music, movements is built upon vision and visuals that are affected, right? Very often the kinds of visuals that we create when we do activism is an artistic flair, because it is necessary to speak not only to the mind, but to the soul of a human being in order to create a movement.
That's beautiful. So you've been, you're related to Genoa, you said?
Genoa, yeah.
Genoa, and you have been in D.C. for how long?
I've been in D.C. For 30 years.
That's terrific. Okay, and how has tell me a little bit about your understanding of her work.
Well, of her work, she's a fabric artist and has traveled all over, basically lifting up different cultural flares in terms of the work that has gone into sort of producing fabrics and how fabrics are manufactured and worn and the colors that are used. So her work has been very dynamic in terms of really speaking to that whole cultural flair, but also a Pan-Africanism that is found in that fabric, right? That exists in Brazil, that exists in the United States, that exists in the Caribbean or in Africa. So there's a kind of relationship between all of these continents and all of these places in terms of the colors, in terms of the way fabrics are worn and utilized. So that's been her work.
And I believe that's been a part of your activism as well too. Is that Pan-Africanist context, or is that fair to say?
I would say a Pan-African context, but also a universalist context, right?
Okay, yeah.
Because to recognize that somehow all of these movements that are taking place in the world for liberation, all the movements that are taking place so that people can have dignity and human rights, they're all related to one another because we're all fighting against the same kinds of people, the same type of movements that are set up to suppress, to exploit, to keep people divided, to keep people from communicating with one another. And that's what art does. Art speaks across those boundaries to each other. And basically, it causes us to recognize how related we are to one another, and out of that relationship to create the kind of movement that builds solidarity, that builds unity, that also respects and celebrates diversity. It's that kind of movement that needs to be built.
What are some of the communities that you feel identified with? And obviously there's this larger universalist context, but bringing that down to kind of the very interpersonal.
Right, I think if you look at the community in Washington, D.C., you know, a black community that is continuously displaced in Washington, D.C., also a Latino community that is always hounded in terms of immigration issues. The African community that is always, again, being hounded in the same way, being dispossessed in the same way. And I always put it this way, whoever is struggling. So that means gay folks as well. That means lesbians as well, or transgender folks. They're all part of the whole. We can't separate people off. it's like what we do in art. Art becomes the movement of colors and of fabric and textures. And so it's those fabric and textures that also unite us as one people. So we allow people to separate us artificially, and therefore we got to overcome that separation and claim the unity that we should be claiming.
It's beautiful. And what are some of the ways in which you think that you have sought to overcome those divisions?
Well, I think that as a pastor of a church, actively have preached the theology that talks about the universality of our existence, and to really embrace people that continue to be ostracized and marginalized in the society, and to declare that they're God's children, they're one of us, right? And that all God's children are part of us, and that doesn't mean that you have to receive and accept God personally, but I recognize the God reflection in each and every human being.
And your church, where is that located?
On North Capitol and Riggs Road.
Where would you like, you talked about some of the displacement and the transformation, and obviously that gentrification that we've seen.
What'd you say? Say that louder. What tree? No, don't climb the tree. We don't want to break branches. Okay?
So in the face of this displacement, the gentrification, the difficulties people have in terms of accessing housing and staying and maintaining the communities that they've been raised in, how do you think we might go about really challenging that and countering that and providing a different vision for how we could live differently?
Well, I think that we got to. And this is part of what creativity and arts should lead us towards. You got to break beyond what has already been done because it hasn't worked, right? And so as you know, an artist brings a new eye to a canvas, or a new eye to a piece of scrap metal, or a new eye to a stone, or to a page, for example, to try to go beyond what has already been done, what has already been stated. Because all what has gone on in this society has been built upon the same old models, and the same old models has displaced indigenous populations. The same old models have enslaved black folks. The same old models basically relegates this pyramid system where people are always on the bottom and somebody's always on top. We got to change that, and we got to begin to look at economics in a different way. We got to begin to look at all of these things, the way we do politics, in a different way. Why is it everything is always an adversarial type of relationship? Whether you're talking about labor unions and you're talking about management, or you're talking about government in Washington, D.C., why is everything always adversarial in terms of what you think you can win, rather than relational out of what can be created that begins to address and resolve the issues that exist within a community?
Fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I think that covers it.
That covers it. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.